Speech number 7 is research your topic, and the objectives today of Johnny's speech is to collect information about your topic from numerous sources, carefully support your photos and your points and opinions with specific facts, examples, and illustrations, and gathered through research. Johnny Marie Urban is a Master Life Success Coach, founder of Wonderful Life Learning Company. She teaches men, women, and children to maximize their potential so they can enjoy unlimited success in every area of their lives. Johnny has over 10 years experience coaching people to create outstanding lives. Author of 2 books in editing, Johnny is here today to share with you snippets from one of her books, which leads me to the title of her speech today, Alaska Totem Poles for the Insanely Curious. Is it art, history, or just plain fun? Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Johnny Marie Urban.
Good morning, fellow Toastmasters.
Good morning.
It's going to be Andrew. I would like every one of you to imagine today that I am the world's premier expert on totem poles. I'm not, of course, but let's just pretend for a few minutes. For the next 5 to 7 minutes, however long it takes, I want to share with you my interest in totem poles. Here's my book that's in editing. This is proof that it's here. You might want to ask yourself, why would a life coach, success life, be fascinated about totem poles and you want to write a book about it? Well, this all started when I went on a cruise to Alaska, and one of the stops was in Victoria, British Columbia, and the very first real totem pole that I got to stand next to that was huge was at in front of the Parliament in Victoria, BC. Here's a photo of it, and I'm going to pass it around so you get a really good idea of this. This totem pole was so huge I couldn't even put my arms around it. And the beauty and the art and the history of it is just amazing. So I got curious and I began to explore what it meant. What did totem poles mean? And what I found is that they have metaphoric stories are attached to each totem pole as they're created and made. There's history. Metaphoric stories are history. They teach, they inspire, and they motivate. Have you ever read a story to a child and noticed the metaphor that's in the story? Have you ever gone to a movie and seen the metaphor that's in that story, or read a book yourself? Well, and it all tends to move you from a place that's in your center in your heart. So that's what I found with totem poles. And as a life coach, I always use metaphoric stories to help move people to where they need to go, to help them get to where they want in life. So to look at a beautiful totem pole, what do you see? The stories that unfold, whether they're from the top to the bottom, they integrate all the tribes together. The definition of a totem pole is derived from the Ojibwe word odendum, which means his kinship group. They're usually made from large native trees, which are, the local native trees are western red cedar, and they're huge if you haven't been up there. Of course, my thought of how the word came from is that I was trying to imagine how they could tote these huge trees, totems, and put them in the ground, and everybody kind of stand around and go, They were never objects of worship, as some people believe. Idol worship, the idol worship idea came from local Christian missionaries who saw the association with, as a shaman, being an occult practice. I'm sorry I have to read this, I'm going to make it really accurate. Being an occult practice. Early explorers made the same assumption. Later discoveries found that they represent lineage stories, some actual facts, and some were just mythical. The order of the image that were stacked on the pole was thought to be a significant low man on the totem pole cliche phrase. The belief was the most important was on the top, and the low man was the least important. There was also a belief, an argument about reverse hierarchy, that the most important was on the bottom, and the least was on the top. There was never any restrictions on the design of the totem pole of whether the most important person was on the top, the bottom, or in the middle. It just didn't matter as long as the story was there. This was a very famous story about Cats and his bear wife. Bear wife sitting on the head of Cats up here, and it represents that she's sitting on the top of the mountain. As the story goes, she is mourning the death of her husband, Cats. If I had more time, I would actually tell you more of the story. The two figures on the bottom are actually descendants, but that's another story. Is that one around? Oh, coppers. These are called coppers. Now, they were not made from coppers, they were made from wood. These were, when they were depicting coppers on a carved column, it was a widespread practice that reveals how old and entrenched the concept of wealth was within the culture. The coppers represent money and currency in the early 1900 century. So the more coppers that were depicted on the pole, the more money the tribe had. And these exchanged hands just as if our currency today in modern day changes hands. This is my friend Joe and Cheryl. Although we see people on the top of a pole, they're usually, if a person or a man is put on the top of a pole, it is meant that he is the watchman looking for danger for the village. However, sometimes you're going to see someone hanging upside down. That means that they owed the debt to a village. That's is seen inside this white circle. And when the debt was paid, the pole was chopped down, taken to the forest to rot, and a new one was erected. Traditional tools that were used to create a totem pole was called an adze, A-D-Z-E. And it was very sharp blades that were attached to wooden handles. And one of the adze was called an elbow adze because it resembled the shape of an elbow, and it was used to compress the wood, and you'll see the compression in the body of this beautiful eagle. And the compression was made to help make the wood waterproof and to prevent it from cracking. Traditionally, the back of totem poles were hollowed out. It's called the heartwood was taken out to make them lighter, easier to move, easier to erect, and reduce the cracking, as you'll see in this totem pole right here. Totem poles were painted in black, red, brown, and blue-green. Traditionally, charcoal, cinnabar, which is mercury ore, iron oxide, and copper oxide were mixed with the oil of salmon eggs to make the paint. These days, paint comes from the hardware store, but most carvers still use the traditional colors. Last one. This totem was named Nakante, or it was a Nakante type pole. It points to the village, way to the village, and acts as the village voice or announcer. They are often seen in the corners of houses. Thank you. And would tell people when it was their turn to speak. Very good tool to have. So as you can see, the title of my book is very appropriate. Is it art, history, or just plain fun? Thank you.